officer, and as a side, in my free time, I also do an MPhil in international relations. And this is the focus of the research that I'm trying to do for my thesis. Before this colloquium, I wanted to put it to focus a little bit more on the part that I think is going to be more interesting for people who are not necessarily doing IR, which is deterrence. In general, this is the topic, deterrent effect of formal alliance treaties, and this is my thesis. What you write down matters. So that's it. Basically, my idea is that not the treaties that you write or whatever is put down in written form between states or actors in international relations in general has a certain effect. More specifically, I'm looking at the deterrent effect, so the power by one treaty in this case to prevent some other actors from doing some specific actions, which is hard to explain and sometimes hard to comprehend, although everybody's heard about deterrence. You know, there's legal definitions of deterrence there. We use it in political science and IR. They use it in other fields as well. But the best way I can try to show it to you and to explain it to you is by looking at that, if I manage to get there. Oh, yes. Yes, I will need to put on some. Probably will need to put on some old. No, that's not supposed to be. But yes, I need to put on some credentials here, because this was the issue before. Sorry guys, this was checked before I was working, and let's see if it still does, because I think the guy who was going to speak is much better able to do this than I am. Let's see. Okay, so the video is coming, but here, so how do I put it over there? Yes? There it is. Okay, so now I need
Doomsday scheme cost us such a small fraction of what we spending on defense in a single year. But the deciding factor was when we learned that your country was working along similar lines, and we were afraid of a doomsday gap.
This is preposterous. I'd never approved of anything like that.
Our source was the New York Times.
Dr. Strangelove, do we have anything like that in the works?
A moment, please, Mr. President. Under the authority granted me as Director of Weapons Research and Development, I commissioned last year a study of this project by the Bland Corporation. Based on the findings of the report, my conclusion was that this idea was not a practical deterrent, for reasons which at this moment must be all too obvious.
Then you mean it is possible for them to have built such a thing?
Mr. President, the technology required is easily within the means of even the smallest nuclear power. It requires only the will to do so.
But how is it possible for this thing to be triggered automatically and at the same time impossible for one trigger?
Mr. President, it is not only possible, it is essential. That is the whole idea of this machine, you know. Deterrence is the art of producing in the mind of the enemy the fear to attack. And so, because of the automated and irrevocable decision-making process which rules out human meddling, the doomsday machine is terrifying. It's simple to understand, and completely credible and convincing.
Gee, I wish we had one of them doomsday machines, thanks.
But this is fantastic, strange one. How can it be triggered automatically?
Well, it's remarkably simple to do that. When you merely wish to bury bombs, there's no limit to the size. After that, they are connected to a gigantic complex of computers. Now then, a specific and clearly defined set of circumstances under which the bombs are to be exploded is programmed into a tape memory bank. A single row of chip can store all the information in the 25
changed it when you became a citizen. Just another perfect leap. I cried by in the name,
Is that the whole point of the doomsday machine is lost?
If you keep it a secret, why didn't you tell the world, eh?
It was to be announced at the party congress on Monday. As you know, the Premier loves surprises.
Okay, no. Okay, come to me, yes. Okay, what's the point of that video? First of all, it's a great movie. And second, it's the best explanation I've ever found of deterrence that I've never found in a single paper or book. Actually, that sentence, the art of producing fear of attacking, is the whole essence of deterrence. So you have to do something in order to prevent somebody from committing a certain action. It doesn't have to be a state, but specifically here we're talking about states, clearly. Now, what are the key elements? Also, this video also shows what the key fundamental elements of deterrence are. One is publicity. So the very last sentence, why didn't you tell the world? If you have a deterrent and you don't show that you have it, it's useless. That's the reason why, for example, North Korea has taken so many nuclear tests or pseudo-nuclear tests to show the advancement. It wasn't, I mean, we know about North Korea because it happened recently, but it does happen for every single nuclear power, US, USSR, China, Britain, and so on. Second, the credibility. The credibility is maybe as important, or even more, I mean, they're equally important. Because the point here is to show that you are willing to use it, to use this whatever it means that would unleash potential destruction instead of nuclear, or just make sure that the enemy would face consequences. Because this deterrent is usually very costly and it's going to lead to bad consequences even for the actor who's launching them. Specifically in the case of deterrence, the one way of showing credibility is something that we call tying hands, which means limiting the options. One example, in the 1066, when William the Conqueror reached British shores, he ordered to burn the ships. Why is that? I mean, that's something that limits the actions at the disposal of the troops, right? Because they cannot run away anymore, right? So what's the point? The point is, in one of the potential points that William wanted to show is send a message to the enemy. We're going to fight no matter what, because we have no longer a way to escape. And that's the same idea behind the doomsday machine and the same idea behind all kinds of deterrents. And I wanted to show it to you via a couple of graphs. They're very simple. They use game theory, but it's extremely simple. So basically, this thing is called a decision tree, or as you know, it basically shows what are the decisions that each actor takes at each point. It is a model, so it's a simple representation of reality. And there are only two actors, a challenger and a target. It is an extended game, meaning that this is the first stage today, and that's the second stage tomorrow. That's it. And each of the ramifications means that all the actors can choose an action. So first is the challenger, who can choose whether to start a dispute or not. If it doesn't, the original status quo remains, nothing changes. If it does start a dispute, then the target has two options. It can acquiesce, leading to a revision in favor of the challenger, or it can retaliate, which leads to war. Now, what's the goal of deterrence? Is, as I said before, to reduce the options, or at least reduce the rational options for the target. T needs to show C that it is willing to go to war, and that it has only its best option is going to war, not to acquiesce. To make it more concrete, let's put in a few numbers, but these numbers have nothing meaningful, they just show references. Just imagine that 0 is lower than 2, meaning that this just shows that in reality, this or this target would prefer 2 to 0. That's it. So just this is an ordering of references, nothing else to be attached to it. So what happens in this situation? Here C has an option to start or not to start, and targeted has the option to acquiesce or retaliate. Now, what would T do if C launches a dispute? In this case, considering what I just said. Any guess?
Acquiesce.
What is it? Acquiesce. Yeah, right. So it's better off by acquiescing rather than by retaliating, even though that would be the best outcome for T. But it will still acquiesce if this is the situation, if C starts a dispute. So what's the best option for C? They will start a dispute, because you know that T will acquiesce, and so will reach his payoff, the outcome would be better from 2 to 3. That's a situation of incredible deterrent. Now, what's a credible deterrent? That's the goal of T. T needs to do something like this. Needs to show that it is better off for T to retaliate rather than acquiesce, or at least let C believe that. That's the whole goal of deterrence, and that's the whole idea behind the doomsday machine out of it. So now the question becomes, what is going to be credible? Now, if you fear you will be attacked, there's a high chance that you will say, I will defend myself, and it's a high chance that your opponent will believe that, right? So it hardly happens that the state launches a dispute and then the other one and this dispute concerns the national territory, and then the other state just gives up and lets the other run over the territory. But what about if state A promises to defend state B from state C? That's a different story, and that's what I'm actually looking at. A little bit more complicated model, which just means extended deterrence. Extended deterrence means using deterrence not to defend yourself, but to defend somebody else. So instead, you see, up to here, it was the same, right? It was the same model before. Just we're putting in a third actor, an ally or a protege. So you think that when the situation leads this point, you can either start to this. Actually, I could use this, so that's easier for you to read. You can either retaliate, there we go, or acquiesce. Now, if T retaliates, then the ally has the option to intervene or not to intervene. If the ally intervenes, you start a multilateral war, while if it doesn't, there's just a bilateral war between T and C. Obviously, here the assumption is that a multilateral war will be easier to win for A and T versus C. Okay, so that's the basics. And now it is extended deterrence. So it's like before. The only difference is that A is the deterrent, but is using the deterrent not to defend itself, but to protect T. Now the question here, as Thomas Schelling put it, Thomas Schelling won the Nobel Prize in economics a few decades back. And he was saying this, the difference between the national homeland and everything abroad is the difference between threats that are inherently credible. As I said, it's highly likely that they will believe you if you say, I'm going to defend my homeland. But then what about defending another state's homeland? Now, imagine in this situation we are in something called anarchy. There's a lot of discussion about anarchy. Just simply, let's put it in the simplest possible way. There is no higher authority in all this. So there is nobody that will make sure that A will intervene. It's up to A's decision. So A, if they really want to intervene, they need to show it to C. Because the goal in all this is to prevent war from happening. It's another assumption that I didn't state it before, but it's stated in the fact that whenever there's war, the payoffs are lower than when there is a status quo. So simply, the assumption here is that war is costly. Now, how do we make this deterrent threat, credible? That's the question I'm trying to answer. And, one way is to use a nuclear deterrent. The US protects Britain or Europe from the USSR by placing its nuclear weapons on German territory, on Italian territory. But there are other ways in which this can happen. And I'm specifically looking at treaties, alliance treaties. And that's the question I have in mind. You know, alliance treaties are not all the same, and we're going to look at them in a second. And there's the problem of credibility and extended deterrence. Now, which of these designs, which of these treaties is better at deterrence? That's the question I'm trying to answer by putting together two bodies of literature and something else. Are you all with me at this point? Should I go on? Okay. So now I wanted to look at treaties specifically. You know, alliance treaties that have, meaning that they've been formalized and written down, the allies can also not have a treaty. If you think about the US and Israel, these are two allies, but obviously they are aligned in foreign policy, but they don't have a specific alliance treaty. That's something to keep in mind. While NATO, for example, is an alliance treaty. Though the Warsaw Pact is another case. So how do treaties differ? They're not the same. Over time they varied in primary obligations. What is the primary obligation? So an alliance can be not just defensive, it can also be offensive. You know, I was mentioning NATO, which is a defensive goal, but there are all other kinds of alliances. For example, the tripartite pact between Japan, Germany, and Italy in 1939, right before World War II, which clearly had an offensive purpose. Or the German-Soviet non-aggression pact, also in 1939. So these pacts didn't have any deterrent purpose at all. They were actually escalatory, right? They were, if a treaty is aligned forces for the purpose of conquest, that seems to escalate war rather than reduce the chances of war happening, right? So that's one first distinction to make. And neutrality pacts also have an escalatory effect. I show you why. If USSR and Germany promise not to attack, not to defend France if Germany attacks or if Russia attacks, then Germany or Germany or Russia knows that they will need to face France and nobody else, not another country that will follow. Okay, so that's why neutrality pacts also have this escalatory effect. Alliances can also vary in terms of secrecy. A public treaty actually lives up to the requirement of publicity that we mentioned before, while a secret treaty, for example, when Italy was unified in 1959, that happened in 1859, sorry. That happened because France at Piedmont had signed a secret defense pact by which France would promise to intervene on behalf in defense of Piedmont in case of an Austrian attack. Now, Austria didn't know about the pact, so obviously that pact didn't have any deterrent effect. Actually, it was also escalatory. Treaties can vary in membership, bilateral, multilateral, they can vary. The majority of alliance treaties are bilateral. There's, especially in recent times, a good number have become multilateral. They can vary in terms of formal organization. Now, again, a few treaties can only establish consultation between the parties. Others can just say the parties will promise to intervene on behalf of one another and in support of one another without saying that they will meet or establish an organization. But other treaties establish a permanent organization with a secretariat. Again, the extreme example is NATO, that has an integrated military command and a parliamentary assembly and a variety of other mechanisms. It's not the only alliance to have a secretariat and a series of mechanisms for the establishment of permanent formal organizations. That again, we'll see in a second. I will try to argue that it is a deterrent. Consultation provisions, some treaties do establish that the parties will meet annually or at given times to consult on crisis management or whatever. So that's also a variation, not all treaties do that. And whether the level of peacetime military coordination, to what extent the allies promise to sustain one another, not just in times of war, but also times of peace. So if, for example, the US and South Korea have joint military exercises once a year, that sends a signal. While if they don't, that sends a different signal because there's a possibility that the two forces are not able to work together in case of war. But if they do participate in joint exercises, for example, or they have an integrated military command, then there's a higher probability that they will be better in war. So these are the way in which treaties change. Just an example, we already talked about it. There's variability in the 19th century. The Quadruple Alliance was formed at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, and the Three Emperors League was an agreement between the emperors of Germany, Russia, well, Germany at the time, Austria and Russia, and there was simply a non-aggression pact. So there's a variety, there's variation in design between the two, and in more recent time, distinction between two alliances of the Cold War period that were set by the United States and other allies, NATO and SEATO. They had different commitments, and especially SEATO was much weaker in collective defense provisions than NATO. As you can see, this is just for illustration purposes. Very simply, this I've talked about it a little bit, but more in detail. How would these treaties vary, and how would these treaties affect the chances of another party attacking or not? Well, rather than attacking, I would say initiating a dispute. So we're not just talking about starting a war, but we're talking about something called a militarized interstate dispute. So a threat or use of force. For example, putting troops at the border, or issuing a threat, promise to use force, or something like that. So that's the level of dispute that I'm talking about. I'm not just talking about starting shooting and stuff. There can be military skirmishes and other stuff as well, but there's a variety of disputes. So how would treaties with this higher degree of formality, so more complex treaties in general, be better deterrent? So these are technical terms which just refer to the costs. And if you remember the graph that we showed before, the goal is to show that for the target, the goal is to show that it is too costly for it not to live up to the commitment or to the threat. So there are two ways of thinking about costs. One is sunk costs. These are simply costs that are paid upfront when you sign the treaty or whenever you do an action. It's something that you lose. Let me give you a simple example that comes from a different field, education. You go to Oxford and then you show it in your CV. So then you lose money by coming to Oxford or whatever. If you have a scholarship, good for you. But anyway, you spend money or you spend resources. And at the end of the day, you may not learn more than somebody who goes to a university with a lesser name knows, and we know that. But what's the value added of saying I go to Oxford is to show the potential employer that you have skills, that you were able to do that. So that's a signal, because you paid a cost, but you wouldn't have paid that cost if you weren't able to do specific things, which are, for example, the things that are required to enter into a high-level university. So that's an example of some costs. In this specific area, I'm thinking of the treaty that is signed and ratified at home. The governments become responsible towards their parliament or whatever their national audience. In case of a non-democracy, the leader may be responsible towards the Politburo or whatever circle controls them or gives them confidence. Other ways of paying sunk costs is by setting up an organization, paying staff. It all costs money, right? So that and also in terms of military coordination, you share your defense plans or your contingency plans to another state. I remember in an area in a realm of anarchy, you're not sure what will happen if the other state may commit treason against you or whatever, may look back. So there's a variety of costs that are paid in a more formalized treaty, which show that you wouldn't pay them if you weren't really going to use them. Second, time-enhanced costs. This is a different kind of costs that are costs that you don't pay unless you don't live up to the commitment. Or in other words, costs that you pay ex post if you don't live up to the commitment. So, for example, a clear example is there is an attack by Russia on Poland, and Britain and France have promised to defend Poland, and they don't do it anymore. So that cost necessarily they obviously don't pay the cost of war, but they may pay other costs. specifically audience cost or reputation cost. It will be harder for them to commit to other deals with other countries because they will know that they are unreliable. Now, if the deal is very formal, then, or it is, there's a variety of mechanisms established in that, and then they are public and all that, then this, again, creates higher costs that they would be paid if the countries didn't live up to that commitment. That's a way in which, the way that I think of enhanced cost is that they connect, but also some costs, they connect the treaty signature period to the eventual dispute initiation period. Now, what do I mean by this? The treaty is signed at a specific moment, 1949, for example, and a dispute may occur potentially occurred in 1949, 1950, 1960. Now, these two costs ensure that the commitments made in 1949 are still valid in 1960, or they would still create costs in case of non-compliance in 1960 and 1970. That's why the issue of political consultations comes in handy, because if states keep meeting once a year, they can update their strategic calculation, they keep creating plans for whatever they are planning to do and how to respond to crisis management. And then very briefly, we in rational choice theory, they tend to look a lot of costs, but less of benefits. There's a variety of mechanisms that lead to higher benefits. For example, are you familiar with the concept of economies of scale? That means that if in a firm over time, through to increase in the budget, increase in the workforce and improvement in technology, it costs less to produce a single unit of something, so the total production can expand. Similarly here, security production can expand. States that you can see as firms can work better and more efficiently. And that obviously may create spillovers. Another example, there's a lot of discussion on functionalism, which means integration on a specific area leading to integration on another area. Rather than talking about integration, we can just talk about cooperation. If one state is interested in economic cooperation with another one, and the second one is interested in security cooperation, if the two issues are linked, for example, by a treaty, there's higher chances that both of them will comply with the two kinds of cooperation. Is that clear? Otherwise, I will explain it again. So there are benefits, in my view, for different kinds of treaties, and the treaty design is a way of showing that. Now, what is the implication of all this as a theory? We should try to prove it, and one way I try to prove it is by using, focus on a research design on a large data set that shows all the disputes, the potential disputes between states, and the implication is that all things equal, the presence of a formalized treaty reduced the probability of militarized interstate disputes. Now, let me see. Other things equal means that other things may affect the initiation of a dispute. For example, the existing unenduring rivalry can create higher chances of dispute initiation, and we need to control for that. Other things equal means that the two allies may have foreign policy differences, which may reduce the probability of one state coming to the help of the other. So that's again needs to be controlled for. Now, the presence of a formalized allied treaty between a potential target in a country diet and a third party. Okay, so a potential target, I'm talking about potential target and potential challenger. This means that not necessarily here it is a challenger, but actually it's a state that may become a challenger by